Well, hello there, BookTube. This is turning into a two-video weekend. And the reason being is that on Friday I finished a book that has put a couple of questions into my mind, and I thought I would like to share those questions with you and get your point of view on them. Now, I'll say up front that you don't need to have read the book that I read in order to have views on these two questions. It's just that it's set them off for me, okay? But I will start by talking a bit about the book, so you know what it is. So I read Sharks in the Time of Saviours by Kawai Strong Washburn. Is it Strong Washburn or Washburn Strong? Strong Washburn. And oh look, can I do this without too much glare? Oh, it's tricky, isn't it? Ah, there we go. That's the angle, isn't it? So that's a rather appealing cover as seen on the ebook. Came out in sometime in 2020. It's debut novel by Washburn Strong. That's going to drive me mad, isn't it? Got to get into. I'll just call him Washburn. Just call him Washburn. Okay, so it's his debut novel. He's a Hawaiian American. It was quite a big book, I think, in the States. If you're from there, you can tell me so. I know it was, like one of Obama's books of the year. Don't think it made as much noise here in the UK, although I know that it's currently being translated into quite a few different languages, so it's going to get around the world a bit. We've been talking lately on BookTube, haven't we, about good books with bad endings? And I would say that this is a good book with a really strong beginning and a entirely satisfactory end. Like it winds things up in a way that is not too neat but is satisfying, meets my requirements. Yep. But it's got not such a good middle. Not a bad middle, but it goes a bit slack. I found myself sort of becoming a bit lethargic about reading it in the middle somewhere. But I'm glad I stuck with it and didn't give up, because it pulled itself back round. So a good book with a bad middle rather than a bad ending. The beginning is great, and this is where the sharks come in. So no, this was not a springathon read. This is a novel, but with added shark action. So there's this great scene towards the beginning of the book where a young boy falls in the water on a boat trip, and is being carried away from the boat and is brought back to the boat by a group of sharks, and is carried back to the boat, held in the mouth of a shark, and kind of lifted up back to his family on the boat. It's a beautifully described scene. It's one of those sort of really kind of like great things at the beginning of a novel that kind of get you going, think what's this all about, what's this going to mean, how's this going to work. It's not the very first chapter, but it's very early on. And then I suppose the rest of the book in a way is sort of the aftermath of that incident, or the way their understanding of it shapes this family. Two parents and three children, the one that's saved by the sharks, and his older brother and younger sister. Sibling rivalry is a really key element in the book, and actually one of the ones I particularly enjoyed. I come from a large family, lots of siblings, and it really, although the sibling rivalry is quite kind of intense in this book, well, it probably was in my family too at times, Washburn nails the way in a family with more than one child. Each child can get a bit pigeonholed into, oh, this is the one that does this, and this is the one that's going to do that, and this is the one that gets more attention, or and really got that. I'm wonder how many brothers and sisters he has. So that was a good element. The writing style, I like the writing style. It can be quite lyrical at times, but it's also quite physical. You get a lot of sort of smells and sounds and textures and feelings in this book. and which was something I enjoyed. It oh, he uses elements of what I think he would describe as Hawaiian pidgin, sort of like dialect, not heavy, but I really enjoyed that. I liked that the language. If you enjoyed the way Ingrid Persaud uses Trini dialect in Love After Love, you would enjoy what he does with language in this book. So we're talking plus points, aren't we, at the moment? The book is written from the point of view of the 5 different family members, and with sort of first person point of view from each of them. Now that is quite a tough thing to pull off, isn't it? And I thought that he does really well. That works. But I think that might have had something to do with why it goes a bit baggy and slack in the middle, because I think trying to sustain that for 5 characters, and once they're no longer all living together and you're trying to kind of tell everybody's story through that mechanism when they're dispersed, quite challenging. As I say, it works. It works. That's not a sort of It was a quite brave choice, I think. The other thing that you will have guessed from the fact that there's that initial scene with the sharks, and a scene before that, in fact, with the night walkers of Hawaii, there's a kind of magical, folk history tale element to the book. And I know that that's a big turn off for some people. I thought he pulled it off really successfully in this book, and for 2 reasons. One is he maintains that element of uncertainty, both in our minds as the reader, but also in the characters' minds about what is happening and what they're experiencing and why certain things, and is it real and what does it mean? So that helps. The other thing is that in other respects, it's quite a realist book, I suppose. In fact, the thing that I like best about it is that it really describes for you and takes you to and explores interestingly a like living in the on the bottom rungs of Hawaiian society. That where you graft and you graft, but you're still sort of struggling from one rent day to the next, from one bill to the next. That, really does that. And so that kind of counterbalances, I suppose, the slightly woo-woo magic-y bits. Another bit of that kind of toughness, I suppose, of the book is, and it's very much a non-sentimental book. Is that toughness is that the children look to escape the sort of the struggle, the grinding struggle of being poor, by through education, and that's sort of like the possible route out, and so they go to the mainland of the USA to study, and how that works for them, and the issues of being kind of like an outsider, and elements of racism, and being a long way from home, and maybe being pulled back, all of that. Big thumbs up. That kind of contrast, I suppose, makes the magical bit okay. So, is it a book that I recommend? Yeah, it's a kind of was like a solidly successful book for me. Not like 5-star, totally amazing, everybody must read it, but a book that I would happily recommend. But the thing that it did was it set off 2 questions in my head. Okay, and this is what I'm going to share with you. So after I'd read it, I went and looked up a bit more about the author, and I found an interview that he'd done with, I can't remember, some magazine, talking about the book. And I discovered in that interview that he is not of sort of Hawaiian heritage. I mean, he was born and brought up in Hawaii, but that's not where his family origins are from. And I caught myself having like a little twinge of disappointment when I found that out. And that interested me, that I had that little twinge of disappointment. And I wondered why. Because, I don't believe, I think, that only a sort of Indigenous person can draw on a particular culture. You don't a particular culture or set of stories or history or traditions, of a place where they live. You don't have to. Your family doesn't have to live there forever for you to sort of be allowed to adopt and own and use that culture and those traditions. So, number one. And in fact, more than that, I don't think that authors should only write about their own times and their own culture and their own country and their own, history. I really don't. I think that as long as you're not sort of, I don't know, somehow negatively exploiting other people's history and culture, that really, we should be free to write about anything, as I say, as long as it's not kind of like, yeah, exploitative, shall we say, appropriation or abusing a culture that you don't really understand. You've got to do your research properly and give it, the right treatment, I guess. So why then did I feel that little bit of, oh, what a shame he's not properly Hawaiian? Like, what is properly Hawaiian? And I think that's because I am quite interested in the whole sort of own voices thing. I'm interested in what element that brings to a story and to how a writer tells a story, and does that bring something extra or different? Yeah. So I'm interested in your reactions, and does the fact that you now know that although he was born and brought up in Hawaii, he's not sort of Hawaiian long term. I don't know. It's a bit hard to describe, isn't it? Would that influence whether or not you read this book? Tell me. I'm intrigued in what you think, of my reaction, as it were. Is it a bit hypocritical? I don't know. Question number 2 is that there's something that I've noticed in a number of books that I've read recently and, over the last few years. And it's now this is a bit hard to kind of explain properly, but it's kind of like setting up an association between a sort of indigenous or pre-industrial society, and somehow being like in tune with nature, and like acting as part of a sort of sustainable system rather than being, exploitative and ripping the heart out of nature in how we live. And like there's an element of truth in that, but it's also, I don't know. I mean, I was thinking, it came up in The Yield, it came up in The Inhabited Woman, 2 things that I've read recently, and I naturally, my sort of values and politics and concern about the environment and so on would mean that I would expect to like that as a theme, as a way of thinking, as something that you might express, and that you might kind of, bring those stories or that history or that into a novel to kind of help us think about how we're behaving now. But there's something about it, and I'm not specifically sort of accusing Washburn of this. There's something about it that generates a slightly skeptical reaction in me. I think it's a bit, I don't know, almost sort of this romantic vision of a golden era in the past when things were purer and more virtuous and more sustainable and green. It's like almost like the sort of noble savage idea or something. And I don't think the past was necessarily so wonderful. I mean, like, just because a sort of a society was hunter-gatherer or a sort of, society or whatever, doesn't mean that they were, in their heads, all green and ecological. You know what I mean? It's like there were just fewer people, so it's naturally less damaging to the environment to have a much smaller population. Um, and I have the feeling that any given individual in any of those societies might have been just as happy to sort of exploit natural resources more if they'd had the technology. I mean, like, the history is that people kept sort of developing more exploitative technologies. That's how we've got ourselves in the mess as human beings that we're in. So that kind of, I don't know, that, like, that it wasn't really a choice that they made, I suppose. So it's over romanticizing to impose that from our 20th century perspective. Now, am I just being a churlish old misery guts saying that, or do you ever react like that to something when you come across that in a book? I mean, I have to say that I think Kawai Strong Washburn does that quite subtly and quite gently, and not in a sort of really sentimental or over romanticized way, but nevertheless it sets something off for me. So I'm interested in knowing your opinion, and don't think I'm a bad person, please, for reacting like that, but I'm interested in whether you do. So I look forward to your comments.